More than 100 years ago, humans built the largest ship the world had ever seen. They were so proud of it that they called it unsinkable. People believed not even the ocean itself could bring it down. But just 4 days into its very first journey, this giant ship vanished beneath the freezing waves, and more than 1,500 people lost their lives. This is the true story of the Titanic. The Titanic was built in a city called Belfast in Ireland by a famous company called the White Star Line. It took thousands of workers about 3 years to build it. When it was finished, it was the biggest moving object humans had ever created. People called it the Ship of Dreams. How big was it? The Titanic was nearly 270 meters long, about the length of 4 city blocks. Stood on its end, it would tower over almost any building of its time. It weighed more than 50,000 tons. And it wasn't just big, it was beautiful. The Titanic had fancy restaurants, a swimming pool, a gym, a library, and a famous grand staircase with a glass dome above it. For wealthy passengers, it was like a floating 5-star hotel. The man who designed it was named Thomas Andrews, and he was incredibly proud of his ship. In charge of sailing, it was Captain Edward Smith, one of the most experienced captains in the world. This voyage was meant to be the very last of his long career before he retired. The ship was built with special walls inside that could seal off water if part of it flooded. Because of this, newspapers said the Titanic was practically unsinkable, and people believed it. That belief would turn out to be a deadly mistake. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set off on its very first trip across the ocean, its maiden voyage. It left from Southampton in England, heading for New York City in America. Crowds cheered and waved as the great ship pulled away. The plan was to cross the entire Atlantic Ocean. On board were more than 2,200 people, passengers and crew together. There were 2 very different worlds on the ship. In first class were some of the richest people alive, like millionaire John Jacob Astor, enjoying huge rooms, grand dinners, and servants. Down in third class were hundreds of families with very little money, leaving everything behind for the dream of a new life in America. But rich or poor, everyone shared the same excitement. The Titanic felt like the future itself. But the North Atlantic in April hid a deadly danger: icebergs, enormous mountains of ice that break off from glaciers and drift in the sea. And the scary part? Most of an iceberg hides underwater, where you can't see it. As the Titanic sailed on, other ships sent warnings by radio. "Be careful! Ice ahead!" Several came in that day, but the radio room was busy sending passengers messages, and some warnings never reached the captain. And here's the problem. The Titanic did not slow down. It kept going fast, almost full speed, through the dark, icy water. Everyone was so sure the ship was unsinkable that the ice didn't feel like a real threat. That night, the sea was strangely calm, flat as glass. Normally, waves splash against an iceberg's base and help you spot it. But with no waves at all, the iceberg was nearly invisible in the dark. High up sat a lookout, whose job was to watch for danger. But on this trip, the lookouts didn't even have binoculars. They had been misplaced. So they searched the pitch-black ocean with only their eyes. Then, late on the night of April 14th, at 11:40 p.m., the lookout saw it. A huge, dark shape rising straight ahead. An iceberg! He rang the warning bell and shouted to the bridge. The crew threw the ship into a hard turn and tried to reverse the engines. The Titanic slowly began to swing away, but it was too late. The iceberg scraped along the right side of the ship, below the waterline. It didn't smash the ship like in a movie. Instead, it popped open the metal plates under the water, leaving a long line of gaps. And through them, freezing seawater began pouring in. At first, hardly anyone noticed. Many felt only a small bump and went back to sleep. Some passengers even joked and played with chunks of ice on the deck. But Thomas Andrews, the designer, did the math, and his face went pale. The Titanic could float with 4 flooded sections, but the iceberg had opened 5. Slowly but surely, the unsinkable ship was going to sink. Andrews told the captain the terrible truth. They had only about 2 hours left, and now came the most heartbreaking problem of all. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, enough for about half the people on board. Why so few? Because everyone believed the ship could never sink, so extra lifeboats were seen as a waste of deck space, almost decoration. The order rang out: women and children first. Families were torn apart on the freezing deck. Mothers and children were helped into the boats, while many fathers and sons stayed behind, knowing they might never see them again. There were heartbreaking choices everywhere. An elderly couple, Isidore and Ida Strauss, were offered a place in a lifeboat. But Ida refused to leave her husband's side. They had been together for decades, and they chose to stay together to the end. And in the fear and confusion, something tragic happened. Many lifeboats were lowered only half full. Boats that could have saved 60 people left with just 20 or 30. Hundreds of lives that could have been saved were not. But there were heroes, too. A passenger named Margaret Brown helped others into the boats and later begged her crew to row back for survivors. She survived and became famous as the unsinkable Molly Brown. As the front of the ship sank lower and lower, the ship's musicians did something incredibly brave. They kept playing calm music on deck right to the very end, trying to keep everyone from panicking. The crew fired bright distress rockets into the night sky, begging any nearby ship for help. Shockingly, another ship, the Californian, was close enough to see them, but its radio operator had gone to sleep, and it never came. Help was so near, and yet so far. Finally, the ship tilted so steeply that it cracked in two. And at 2:20 in the morning, on April 15th, 1912, the mighty Titanic slipped beneath the freezing water and disappeared into the dark. Just over 2 hours after hitting the iceberg, it was gone. Out of more than 2,200 people, around 1,500 did not survive. The water was below freezing, and most could not last more than a few minutes in it. It became one of the deadliest peacetime shipwrecks in all of history. Far away, another ship called the Carpathia had heard the Titanic's distress calls and raced through the night at full speed, dodging icebergs to get there. It arrived too late to save everyone, but it rescued about 700 survivors from the freezing lifeboats and carried them safely to New York. The whole world was stunned. How could the unsinkable ship sink on its very first trip? Investigations followed, and important new rules were made. Every ship had to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board, run safety drills, and keep their radios on at all times. Those rules still protect travelers today. For more than 70 years, no one knew exactly where the Titanic lay. Then, in 1985, explorers using underwater robots finally found the wreck, resting almost 4 kilometers down on the ocean floor. Today, tiny bacteria are slowly eating the metal, and one day, the great ship will be gone forever. The story of the Titanic still touches us all these years later. It reminds us that no matter how big, how strong, or how clever the things we build are, nature is always more powerful, and that a little humility can save lives. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like and subscribe for more. And tell me in the comments, which story should I tell next? Until next time.